Hi YouTubers, this is a video about a watch that's for sale at the time of this recording on eBay. You can search for it under Tudor Prince Oysterdate 90733. Okay, so I figured I'd also put up this video since sometimes it's useful to have more information because I don't see too much information about this particular model 90733. This watch, particular watch, based on a serial number, is from 1980. Though, as you'll see later on, there's some question about whether some of these parts are actually from 1980. But in any case, so let me talk first about why I bought the watch and go through some other factors. So why I bought the watch was that, like a lot of guys, I was sort of into the, tool watch, uh, Rolex slash Tudor Axis. Um, you know, we all know what we're talking about. We're talking about like the Rolex Explorer slash Tudor Ranger type watch. And so this watch came up on eBay, and I actually purchased it there. And I think it ticked a lot of those boxes. Since I was looking for a Rolex, Explorer really, and then the Tudor Ranger is the backup on a limited budget, and this sort of was ticking a lot of those boxes, and the price was pretty good. So I bought it. Now the question is why am I selling it? Well, it's kind of for the same reason because I was kind of looking for a Rolex, and this, while pretty close and or really is kind of a Rolex, and I'll explain what I mean about that later, was not quite that as well. And you'll see what I'm talking about. So I think, I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I would have to say that a lot of these videos talk about certain truths. And one of the truths is like, should you buy a Tudor if what you really want is a Rolex? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And what I mean by that is, look, as much as I know that this watch was built by Rolex and actually has Rolex parts, which we'll look at, and even has like Rolex logos on it, and says Rolex, uh, and was even made in the same factory with the Rolexes back in the day, uh, it isn't actually quite a Rolex, at least for the reasons why a lot of people actually do buy a Rolex. So while it's a Rolex at the same time, but no, it's not. Okay, so also on a lot of these YouTube videos, they talk a little bit about like there's situations where a Tudor is actually better than a Rolex. And I think this watch actually epitomizes some of that same truth. And we're talking about a situation where you're looking at a vintage Tudor or Rolex. So this is a vintage Tudor, as I said, from 1980. So let's say you were looking for a watch like this, black dialed steel sport watch slash luxury watch in the Rolex line. Okay, so what would you be able to buy at the same time frame for this watch? So at the time, this 1980s, you would buy this watch, a Tudor Prince Oysterdate, or you could buy a 6694, which is another Rolex watch. It looks very similar, a similar case, similar black dial. I think it has a date too. Why would you prefer this over that actually? Why is this better than that? Well, one of the reasons why this is better than that is that this is you see that says rotor and self-winding there. This is an automatic, whereas the 6694 is not. It is a hand-wound movement. Now, why do you care? Well, one, this, you just put it on and you wear it, and, if it is a daily, you never have to do anything. If you have a 6694, you have to unscrew this screw down crown every day and wind it. Why is that a problem? Well, anyone who's ever used a screw down crown knows that it's pretty easy ultimately to strip one of those things. And obviously, statistically, that becomes a lot more possible if every day you have to unlock that screw down crown and then wind it. So in this case, this watch is better than that. Well, then let's say, why don't I find, say, an automatic from that era? So in that era, that would have been, I think, the Rolex date maybe, and that could be, I think, the 1500, which would be very similar. It would almost look exactly the same, except it would say Rolex and have a coronet, and it would be black dial, same kind of case, and basically have the same kind of functionality. Except that's not true. It would not have the same kind of functionality. So in this Tudor Prince, I think the movement is an ETA 2784. Now, what's special about that movement? So the ETA 2784 turns out to be, I think 17 or 25 joule automatic that has a 45-hour power reserve. That's one cool thing. The second thing that's kind of cool about it, it beats at 28,000 beats per minute, I think is what it is, or whatever the usual beats per hour. I think whatever that 28,000. So what that means is, as you can see, it's got a very smooth sweep, right? So it's very modern in that way. The other most important distinction is the date. So what makes this better than the Rolex date of the same era? Well, the Rolex date of the same era, and a lot of people know this, is not a Quickset date. What is a Quickset date? Well, a Quickset date is where you pull out the crown to the first or second. I can even do that for you. You pull it out, and then you can switch the date, like so. Okay, now, I probably should check something before I did that. But anyway, the Rolex date, however, is not a Quickset. You have to hover around midnight and then switch back and forth, or roll it through the hours to advance the date. So this is a much more modern feeling mechanism than the Rolex date. Okay, anyway. So in those two situations, both the fact that it's an automatic, I'm not even sure what the beat count on the Rolex date is, but this is 28,000 movements, so that it has that smooth sweep and also has the Quickset date. That this makes this an extremely easy to use watch, because it's basically, even though it's vintage, it operates like a modern automatic. So that's what's great about it. So let's talk about what the other specs are. So it is a 34 millimeter case across, not including the crown. It actually has a pretty short lug to lug at 40 millimeters. And that does make it wear a little small as far as the Rolex Axis sort of 34 millimeter cases are. And it's also kind of thick because of that proud acrylic crystal. I can't remember the specs, but it's, maybe around 11 or 12 millimeters. So it's actually kind of thick, or at least, stocky, I guess. This is a hold case, as you can see over there. And that also means that the links, which you can see here, let's see, stamped 361B, are not the kind that you can use the tool like from the back. You must have a hold case to use these end links. Now, you'll also notice that the bracelet is not stamped. And I think that's because I think this is aftermarket or custom. Because if you go and look back in history, this should be folded. Now, I'm not too upset about that, because honestly, this is not a bad bracelet. It has, screw links. It makes the watch look a lot more modern than it would be. And I think both the end links and the clasp are actually original. Like, you can look here, you can see that it's well stamped, because I actually have seen a fake one and it's not well stamped. And you can see there's a serial number as well on the clasp. And, full disclosure, when I got this watch, actually, I think either this one or, yeah, I think it was this one. This link was actually loose. Like, it had been, finagled to fit this, and then I actually, fixed it so that it wouldn't fall apart. So I think proof that was actually custom. But honestly, what the good thing about that is then when you look at whether or not it has any stretch, show that it has hardly any stretch, and then it wears very nicely. Okay, so as I mentioned, it's got a screw down Rolex crown. It's also got a screw down case back that says, Rolex on it, right? But it does have a Tudor Shield clasp and gilt Tudor Shield logo. And then it's got stainless steel indices. It's got that acrylic crystal with the magnifier. This unfortunately, this crystal does have a crack in it right there. You can see it. But it's obviously not in the viewing area, so it's not too bad. Let's see, what else can I say about that? Yeah, so it's a pretty nice, and considering the fact, I mean, this is a testament to what Rolex is and was, or Tudor slash Rolex. And this is basically announcing that it's a Tudor by Rolex. That's why they have all that stuff, like case by Rolex and stuff. But it's really a testament to the design and to the construction that this watch 40 years later is still functioning well, is still, I mean, wears well, looks not out of date, honestly. I mean, it looks very modern, except you only can tell because the way you look on the side profile, they're like, oh, that's very vintage. But otherwise, it's a really, really great watch. So, what do I love about this watch? Well, what I love about it is easy to wear. It runs well. It's very accurate. It has modern functionality. Like I said, it hacks, it self-winds, it's a Quickset date. I mean, it's also obviously very tool. It's very, brushed. Everything's brushed, and then it's got polished sides. It actually, even though it's light, obviously, to wear because it's small, it is fairly substantial, and also on top of it, is well made. I mean, the clasp is well made, as far as a fold-over clasp could be, but the watch itself is fairly substantial, and when you look at it, it definitely feels like it's quality, right? Also, what I like about it is the price is very accessible. I mean, obviously, I bought it because I wanted a Rolex, but if you can't really afford this is really, it's like I said, it's already, there's lots of arguments to say that it's actually better quality than a Rolex of that same generation, and you're getting it for maybe a third, or even as low as a third of, or maybe up to two-thirds the price of what you would buy comparably from Rolex. Okay, so what don't I like about it? Well, one thing I don't like necessarily is that it is a little small, and it's even a little bit small compared to other 34 millimeters. You see, this is my 7-inch wrist approximately, and it doesn't look bad from this perspective, but it is a little small, and you can tell when you compare it to compare it to other 34 millimeter watches because of the 40 millimeter lug to lug, actually more so than the size. It's because it's kind of short, it can seem a little bit small for that perspective. The other thing I don't really necessarily like about it is, and some people would obviously feel different about it, is that it's modern, which I like, but it's also very vintage, which is, very apparent when you wear it. It's kind of squat, right? And, I can appreciate the heritage. This is more true to the whole Explorer vibe, to be honest. I mean, this is like much closer to what they used for the Greenland expedition, for example, or probably was even the right size of what the actual original Explorer was probably a 34, So one could argue that this has more provenance than, say, a lot of the other ones, but at the same time, I think it's cool, but I don't really care about it that much. I mean, so, that's a thing, plus or minus. And then the acrylic. Well, I've had acrylic watches watches with acrylic crystals. Obviously, the crack makes me worry a little bit more about this. Like, using it as a daily, I can sometimes just get a little bit nervous about it, even though it's not that expensive. So, but they're actually the ultimate reason, though, why in the end I don't like it as much as maybe I could, is that, as I said before originally, and I think it's still true, is I bought this because I wanted a Rolex. And while it sort of is a Rolex, I really found myself having a hard time saying that it was a Rolex, my first Rolex, for example. And so ultimately, that is what I got in the end. So I ended up buying this Rolex Air King 14M, and I 14,000. I mean, you can see what I mean. Like, it's both for 34, but this one looks a little bit longer because it's 42 millimeters from lug to lug. And the result is even though they're both 34, you know, and it's hard to say because I'm obviously moving, but this actually feels a little bit bigger. But anyway, so that's why ultimately, you know, I'm selling this one because in the end I wanted the other one. Now, granted, the other one was way more expensive, so you just have to factor that in. If you want the same Rolex quality, actually something made by Rolex, because back in the 80s, as opposed to like today, this was actually made by Rolex because I think it was off the same like factory line. Like this was basically a Rolex back then, but just, you know, one marketed more because of cost functions because of the ETA, which I already pointed out is actually probably a better movement than even the ones that Rolex were making. So I think that you could really argue that this would be the perfect first Rolex. But okay, so it was the perfect first Rolex. I got it, and then I decided I wanted to actually get another Rolex, and which I did, and I got a good price on it. But anyway, that's the Rolex Prince, and you know, I posted this as well because I don't see too much about the 90733, which I don't know if that it's really that different than, I guess, I don't know if it's the 74,000 or whatever other um, model number that they actually posted previously. But in either case, this is a very nice watch. And if you're interested in it, you can find it on eBay if it's still available. I will say one other thing about it is that, you know, at a certain price point, this is available by eBay authentication, which I would say is a really cool thing. I actually bought the other watch with eBay authentication. And when you do that, you end up obviously getting a nice little eBay card, but you also get a box and everything to kind of get the provenance to prove in some ways. I mean, sometimes the box, that's the reason why you buy the box, honestly, is to just get provenance. And that kind of adds that. That's why they give you a box too. So anyway, thanks for looking, and see you later.